The ethics of speaking about others in unequal social support systems. A deep exploration of unequal social power, trauma-informed ethics, disability rights, and the invisible abuse of unsupported individuals through gossip, triangulation, and subtle social exclusion in households and communities. The protected and the erased. This image represents the stark divide between those who are protected by unconditional love and those who are left vulnerable to social exile. Inside the glowing dome, people held in high regard move freely, untouched by conflict, their reputations immune, their place in the world secure. Outside, a single translucent figure stands alone, fading under the weight of judgment, whispers, and rejection, not because of wrongdoing, but because they spoke the truth in a system that punished them for it. The storm above them represents gossip, triangulation, and the weaponization of silence. Yet even in exile, they reach towards something greater, the distant tree of light, symbolizing the enduring strength of truth, human rights, and the sacred will to survive with dignity. This is not a story of weakness. It is a testament to the cost of speaking out when no one stands behind you, and the unshakable clarity of those who refuse to disappear quietly. Some people walk through the world surrounded by a safety net. They have families who will always love them, no matter what happens. They have close friends who've been there for years, who've seen them at their worst, who forgive, who stay, who help them pick up the pieces when things fall apart. These are people who exist within unconditional love dynamics. And that matters, not just emotionally, but practically. That matters in every social interaction, especially when conflict or complexity arises. When someone has access to that kind of support, they move through life with a certain insulation. They can make mistakes, go through hard times, experience misunderstandings, or have their names brought up in difficult conversations, and their world will not collapse. People might be upset with them. People might need space. But they will not be abandoned. Their core relationships won't be undone by a single narrative or an emotional conversation had behind closed doors. Their people will continue to love them. Continue to offer presence. Continue to protect them from full social collapse. This insulation creates a very important social distinction. If you need to talk about someone, especially someone who has deeply affected you in a negative way, the safest and most ethical people to talk to are the ones who love that person unconditionally. These are the only people in the social web who can hear difficult truths without weaponizing them. These are the people who will not flip sides, sever ties, or reframe the person as irredeemable. They can hold complexity. They can hold love and critique in the same hand. They are capable of recognizing that hearing about someone's harm doesn't mean abandoning the person entirely. That's what unconditional love makes possible, the ability to process, to reflect, to remain in connection despite challenges. So if you're person B, someone who is struggling, hurt, or confused by person A, and person A is deeply loved by someone in their circle, it is not only reasonable but sometimes necessary to talk to that loved one. You might need to process what happened. You might need clarity. You might need to be witnessed. And the best person to speak to is someone who loves person A so strongly that what you say will not jeopardize that relationship. That's the safest path for everyone involved. Now, let's turn the mirror. Let's look at the opposite dynamic, the one people so often ignore until it's too late. The fragility of the unsupported, what happens when you speak about someone without a safety net. There are people in every social structure, every household, community, group of friends, or chosen family, who are not surrounded by unconditional love. They may be new to the group. They may be considered strange, difficult, emotionally complex, mentally ill, poor, or simply not one of us. They may have no family, or no contact with the one they do. They may be carrying trauma, or navigating life with minimal resources. They may be tolerated more than embraced. These people live in a very different reality. For them, there is no built-in cushion. No one who will take their side by default. No parent who will say, "I know who you really are." No best friend who will call them after hearing something difficult and say, "I don't care what anyone says, I still love you." They live in a conditional social reality, where their belonging is always subject to review. Where one bad impression, one moment of emotionality, one distorted story can change how they are perceived permanently. And so, when someone talks about them in private, even with the best intentions, there is a much higher risk of harm. The social network around them is not resilient. It is brittle, or even non-existent. Speaking about them in ways that emphasize their flaws, struggles, or difficult behavior can instantly alter how they are seen. It can cause others to pull back, distance themselves, question their character, or decide quietly that this person is too much trouble to keep around. It can even push people to treat them with suspicion, condescension, or coldness, without ever confronting them directly. The tragedy is that this often happens silently, invisibly, and without resolution. The person being spoken about may have no idea what changed, only that the energy has shifted. People stop responding. Opportunities vanish. Invitations don't come. Their social survival is eroded, bit by bit. And in more severe cases, this shift can lead to the loss of basic human needs. They may lose housing, especially in shared living situations where emotional narratives influence group decisions. They may lose access to community resources, rides, job referrals, emotional support, food. They may be placed in situations of increased precarity, where being misunderstood doesn't just hurt emotionally, it endangers their survival. This is not an overreaction or paranoia. This is the reality for people whose relationships are conditional. For people who are not loved unconditionally, reputation is everything. And that reputation is often built or broken in quiet, private conversations where they are not present to explain, to defend, or to offer their side of the story. Reputation is a form of survival. In a world where not everyone is protected, reputation becomes a form of currency. And like currency, it can be destroyed in an instant. For those who lack deep social roots, a single narrative, true, false, or just emotionally charged, can undo years of effort to be included, trusted, or respected. It doesn't matter if what is said is entirely factual. What matters is how it lands. What matters is whether the people hearing it have the emotional and relational depth to hold it without acting on it in harmful ways. When someone lacks a support system, their entire livelihood may hinge on how a few key people see them. A moment of emotional venting, a comment made in frustration, or even a confidential conversation can trigger a chain reaction that removes them from the circle entirely. That is why, when someone has no support, they must not be spoken about lightly, especially not to people who hold influence in their social world. If their connections are few, every connection is sacred. And speaking about them, even harmlessly, can do catastrophic harm. Unequal dynamics require unequal responsibilities. In social systems where one person is surrounded by unconditional love and the other is not, the power imbalance is massive, even if it's invisible. The person with support can survive almost any interpersonal rupture. The person without it may not survive even one. Therefore, the ethical responsibility is higher. The risk is asymmetrical, so the caution must be too. If someone must process their experiences with a person who is deeply embedded in a social structure, the only fair place to do it is with those who love that person unconditionally, because they are the least likely to cause harm in return. They will not let the relationship collapse. They will not exile their loved one. They may listen, they may empathize, and they may not even agree, but their love will remain intact. If, instead, someone chooses to process their feelings about a person with no safety net, especially with people who hold power in that person's life, they may be contributing to a social injury with no path to healing. They may be taking away the only stability that person has left. And they may never know how much harm they've done, because the consequences often unfold in silence, and the unsupported rarely get a second chance. Final words: speak with awareness, or do not speak at all. The core truth is this: in unequal social landscapes, words are not neutral. To speak about someone with strong support is one thing. To speak about someone without it is something else entirely. If we want to live ethically, if we want to create social systems that are not quietly violent to the most vulnerable, then we must learn to recognize this difference. We must train ourselves to see where the safety is, and where it isn't. We must understand that processing is not always harmless, and that talking it out can, in fact, exile someone from their only community. We must ask not just, do I need to say this, but, what will happen to this person if I say this to the wrong person? If you can't answer that question with full awareness of the stakes, then maybe you shouldn't say it at all. Or maybe, just maybe, you should say it to the people who love unconditionally, because they are the only ones who can hear it without destroying someone in the process. The story of Person B, a case of exile in uneven social dynamics. Person B lived in a house not because it was home, but because it was the last option before homelessness. Disabled, chronically ill, and with a long history of abuse, she had nowhere else to go. No family. No friends. No partner. No fallback. Her life had been an uphill battle through trauma and survival, and finally, she had found what seemed to be a sliver of stability, a room in a house shared with two people, Person A and Person A's partner. It wasn't ideal, but there was kindness, quiet, and some mutual understanding. Enough safety to begin healing. Enough stillness to survive. But survival, when social structures are fragile, is never guaranteed. Person A had a mother who visited often. This mother was not outwardly cruel, at least, not in ways people in her family were allowed to name. Her behavior was normalized, folded into family history as just how she is. She made pointed comments, cast judgments through suggestion, and demanded silent conformity to her unspoken rules. She was part of a larger family system that thrived on scapegoating, subtly designating one person as the cause of all discomfort so no one else had to look inward. Their love was conditional, but consistent. If you adapted, if you agreed, if you kept your discomfort to yourself. However, this mother did benefit from unconditional love, from her daughter, Person A, and others around her. Despite her pattern of dysfunctional, controlling, and at times psychologically abusive behavior, her place in the social system was secure. She was protected, even when she caused harm. Her flaws were contextualized, softened, or excused. She was never at risk of social exile, never at risk of being alone. She was, in a very real way, untouchable. Person B, on the other hand, had no such safety. And unlike the rest of the family, she could not conform to dysfunctional dynamics, not because she didn't want to, but because people cannot ethically or psychologically be expected to accommodate or normalize communication styles and behavioral patterns that are inherently harmful. Dysfunctional dynamics, especially those rooted in gaslighting, scapegoating, triangulation, and silent judgment, are not simply a matter of opinion or different values. These patterns are objectively harmful, both socially and psychologically, especially for those who already exist in an unsupported position. Their damage is well documented in trauma research, disability advocacy, and human rights frameworks. These are not quirks. They are violations of psychological safety. To conform to such systems is to agree to one's own erosion. And for Person B, this wasn't metaphorical, it was medical. She had a severe stress-related heart condition that made prolonged interpersonal stress literally life-threatening. The demand to just let things go, to not take it personally, or to just try to get along, wasn't just emotionally unfair, it was biologically impossible. She required peace and functional communication not as a preference, but as a survival need. And when the visiting mother repeatedly violated that need, through undermining, scapegoating, and subtle emotional abuse, Person B tried, carefully and calmly, to speak with her. To explain. To work it out. But the mother saw this not as an attempt at mutual understanding, but as insolence. A challenge to her authority in the social hierarchy. In her worldview, people who didn't silently endure her behavior were difficult, manipulative, or too sensitive. So she responded in kind, with escalation, not resolution. Her goal became not to understand, but to put Person B in her place. Person B couldn't comply with that demand, and she shouldn't have been expected to. The dynamic was exploitative from the beginning, an outsider with no support being asked to suppress her survival needs in order to keep peace with people who had nothing to lose by ignoring them. With no other option, Person B turned to the one person who might understand, Person A. She did this not to create drama, not to divide anyone, but because she believed Person A's unconditional love for her mother made it safe. She hoped that someone who loved the mother so strongly would be able to hold space for the truth without abandoning either party. After all, that's the only safe place to speak when you're vulnerable, in the presence of someone whose love is secure enough to handle it. At first, it seemed to work. Person A listened. She expressed care. She even acknowledged that her mother had a pattern of mistreating people who didn't adapt. For a moment, there was hope. But that hope faded. Slowly. The mother began retaliating in quieter, more insidious ways. She began speaking to Person A, and to the partner, behind Person B's back. She suggested that Person B was persuasive, manipulative, or controlling. She reframed Person B's boundaries as dramatics. Her survival needs became accusations. Her efforts to communicate were now seen as disruptions. Over time, these narratives eroded Person A's perspective. Whether from pressure, internalized loyalty, or emotional confusion, Person A began to shift. She didn't say it outright, but her behavior changed. She pulled away. Her empathy thinned. She began to wonder, was her mother right? Maybe Person B was the problem. Maybe her intensity, her pain, her unrelenting need for clarity and peace meant she was persuasive in a bad way. Maybe she caused this. And then came the worst betrayal. Person B was blamed for speaking up at all. It wasn't just that she was seen as difficult, it was that she was accused of creating the problem by speaking about the mother to someone in her own family. Her one act of self-protection, talking to the only person who could possibly listen, was now framed as disloyalty, manipulation, or starting drama. The irony was unbearable. Her survival strategy was painted as the harm itself. As time passed, the household dynamic fully turned. Where there was once compassion, there was now coldness. Person B became the subject of subtle avoidance, irritation, and withdrawal. Her accommodations were no longer honored. Her boundaries were ignored. Her physical symptoms worsened. Her ability to work disappeared. Her pain flared. And she had nowhere else to go. She was now the outsider again, but with even less than before. This is not a story about someone being too much. This is a story about social dynamics weaponized against someone with no safety net. This is a story about what happens when dysfunction is tolerated, but disability is not. This is about a person being exiled, not because they were persuasive, but because they had valid, non-negotiable health needs in a household built around ignoring them. This is about power, loyalty, and the slow erosion of dignity when one person is protected unconditionally and another is left entirely exposed. And it ends the way these stories always end. The vulnerable person becomes the scapegoat. The original harm is forgotten. The silence becomes the weapon. And the person who needed the most is the one left with nothing. Doing the right thing, what it looks like to choose ethics over comfort. Person C had a friend, Person D, who was struggling. Person D had recently moved into a shared living situation after barely escaping years of instability and harm. She was disabled, had no family, no partner, no financial safety net, and was dealing with serious chronic health issues that made emotional stress and social conflict physically dangerous. She was doing everything she could to maintain peace, follow rules, and respect others' space. But she had limits, biological, psychological, and emotional, that made navigating a chaotic household dynamic increasingly difficult. One day, Person C's sister, who frequently visited and had a strong personality, started making indirect comments toward Person D, passive-aggressive jabs. Judgment disguised as advice. Small, seemingly harmless things that slowly began to chip away at Person D's sense of safety. It wasn't explosive, but it was destabilizing. Person D's health began to spiral. Her heart condition flared up. Her sleep stopped. Her panic attacks returned. Her stress levels became medically dangerous. Finally, in desperation, Person D quietly approached Person C. She wasn't trying to stir drama. She didn't want to get anyone in trouble. She just needed someone to know what was happening, someone who loved the person causing harm but who might also care about protecting her life and stability. And Person C did the right thing. What did she do? She didn't react. She reflected. She didn't take the conversation as a betrayal of her sister. She didn't become defensive. She didn't question Person D's motives or feelings. She understood that the only reason Person D came to her was because she trusted her, because she believed that Person C's love for her sister was strong enough to handle a conversation without weaponizing it. She listened. And then she validated. She said things like, "I understand how hard that must have been for you to bring up. I know my sister can be intense. Thank you for telling me instead of bottling it up. Your health and well-being matter here just as much as anyone else's. And most importantly, let me help make this safe for you. This is your home, too." Then what? Person C didn't go tell her sister everything Person D said. She didn't escalate it into gossip, conflict, or behind-the-back narrative spinning. Instead, she approached her sister calmly and in private. "I know you mean well, but some of the ways you've been speaking are stressing someone in the house who really needs peace to survive right now. They have a medical condition that gets triggered by emotional tension, and I want to make sure we're not doing anything that could hurt them unintentionally. I'm not blaming anyone, I just want us to be mindful, because we all want this to be a livable, kind space." Her sister didn't love hearing it, but because Person C didn't frame it as a battle, the conversation stayed grounded. And even more importantly, Person C never let Person D become the scapegoat. She made it clear to others in the household. Let's not read into this or turn it into drama. She did what any of us would do, she came to someone who could help, safely, and said what she needed to survive. When others began quietly suggesting that Person D was too sensitive or making things about her, Person C interrupted. She has a right to exist in peace. If she's the only one here without support, we need to be more careful, not less. That's not weakness, that's how we protect each other. What's the principle here? When someone has no backup, no one to protect their reputation, no one to hold their side of the story, you must hold it for them. You must recognize that their voice carries no weight without yours, and that your silence will be read as agreement with whatever harm follows. This is not about taking sides. It's about understanding that power is unequal. And in unequal dynamics, ethics means siding with the person who has more to lose. When someone disabled, unsupported, and vulnerable tells you they're being hurt, and they do it privately, carefully, and with trust, it is your responsibility to hold that moment with integrity. That means, don't reinterpret their survival as manipulation. Don't balance the story by gossiping with others who already hold social power. Don't frame their need for peace as a personality flaw. Don't let their legitimate boundaries be misrepresented as drama. Don't let other people rewrite the narrative just because they're louder or more connected. Instead, protect their place in the social fabric. Reaffirm their needs. Use your own privilege, of unconditional love, of credibility, of social immunity, to create safety they don't have. Because this is how we prevent exile. This is how we create dynamics where the disabled, the unsupported, the trauma survivors, and the outsiders don't have to disappear just to stay alive. This is how we build spaces where speaking up is not a risk, but a right. And this is how we honor trust, not just with the people we've always loved, but with the ones who risk everything to tell us the truth. Final point, this is not drama, this is survival. When a person who is isolated, without friends, family, a partner, or social safety net, speaks up about harm, asserts their boundaries, or protects their survival needs, that is not drama. It is not manipulation. It is not persuasion. It is not control. It is not being too sensitive. It is not overreacting. It is not creating conflict. It is survival. It is protection. It is a human right. It is medical necessity. It is what any human being has the right to do, advocate for their safety in a world where no one else is doing it for them. When that person speaks to someone who loves their abuser or their aggressor unconditionally, they are not violating trust, they are choosing the safest possible route available in a dangerously unequal social structure. They are making a calculated, careful, and ethical choice, grounded in the belief that love strong enough to be unconditional can also be strong enough to hold complexity, discomfort, and accountability. If that act is punished, reframed as manipulation, or used to turn others against them, then the harm has not only been repeated, it has been institutionalized. And what is abuse, if not the institutionalization of injustice? Let this be absolutely clear. When an isolated, disabled, unsupported person is spoken about in ways that change the social energy around them, especially in a shared living environment, it is not processing. It is not venting. It is not a neutral act. It is a form of social violence. If that shift makes them feel unsafe in their own home, if it pressures them out, if it degrades their access to basic respect, quiet, resources, or acknowledgement, then it is not just morally wrong. It is abuse. It is a violation of rights. It is not an opinion. It is not a preference. It is not a matter of both sides. In an unequal dynamic, where one person has everything to lose and the others have social immunity, truth is not subjective, it is structural. And when one person's comfort is prioritized over another person's capacity to live, we are no longer talking about misunderstandings. We are talking about oppression. To stand up for one's rights in the face of that is not wrong, it is required. To refuse to be silent is not antagonistic, it is ethical necessity. To demand to exist without having to beg for basic accommodation is not a threat to the group, it is a declaration of dignity. And when people in power, social, familial, or emotional, frame that act of survival as drama, what they are really doing is denying the humanity of the person who has no one else to defend it. There is no excuse for this. There is no justification. There is no other side to the right to exist in safety.